All right, good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Councillor Patrick Walsh and I'm the chair of this committee. A few housekeeping points before we begin. This meeting is being live streamed on the council's YouTube channel. By participating, you are consenting to being recorded. If the fire alarm sounds, I will adjourn the meeting. Please leave the meeting in an orderly fashion by the nearest exit, which is located in the lift lobby down the stairs. Officers will direct you to the assembly point on Shortlands Road. There is no scheduled fire tests for this evening. Okay, moving along to item 1, apologies for absence and apologies for lateness has been received by Councillor Ashok Patel. Item number 2, declarations of interests. Do members have any declarations of interest? Councillor Shivot Verdier.
Chair, just in the interest of transparency, to say that I checked with governance about sitting on the pension fund committee and that there was no issue of conflict of interest.
Thank you. If that could be noted. Are there any other declarations? Okay, hearing none. Item 3. Do members agree to the minutes and the exempt minutes of the previous meeting held on the 26th of July 23?
Agreed.
Hearing no objection, I'll take that as agreed. Item 4, statement of accounts for the 21-22 year, including pension fund accounts and annual governance statement, and update on the 2020-21 accounts and 22-23 external audit. Could I invite Sukhvinder Khalsi to introduce the item, please?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for the somewhat long title for the report, but I'll be very, very brief indeed, because really it's our external auditors report that members want to hear. So the accounts are attached to the report, and we've had a training session earlier to go through some of those. So without further to do, really, perhaps I can pass over to Andy to explain his audit findings report.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sukhvinder. So you have quite a few reports in front of you at this meeting relating to different financial years audits. So I thought it might be useful just at the high level to give a progress report across the audits that we're working on and the progress made since the last committee earlier in the year. We signed the opinion for the 2021 audit in May earlier in the year. That having been a slightly long-running and delayed audit for reasons that we've discussed at previous meetings. So we have been, both teams, on somewhat on the back foot for the 21-22 year audit, which started late last year. But positively, we've been able to progress that audit at a much faster pace than we did for the 2020-21 audit, which is, I think, really positive for everyone involved, and both teams have worked really well together to move that forward at that faster pace. So in overview, the headlines are positive. We've substantially completed our audit work for 21-22 year, and the main outstanding items at the current point are a national issue, firstly, is for all local governments 21-22 audits that are currently ongoing. There has been an updated triennial valuation of the pension fund liability that's impacting all national 21-22 audits that are ongoing. And the effect on our audit and all those other national audits is that the valuation gives updated, more accurate information on the liability and the pension fund and the member data. It's based on the current member data and the current actuarial valuation. So all local government bodies that have had that triennial valuation, we've requested those bodies to have an updated actuarial valuation of the net pension liability. And where that is different to what was in the statements, the draft statements, we ask those bodies to consider whether they need to update the statements based on that valuation. In this case, your team have updated the statements based on the updated valuation, and we therefore go back and look at the triennial valuation and can carry out additional membership testing on that. So that's currently ongoing with your pension fund team. We're engaging with them on pulling a sample, getting additional evidence to gain assurance over the revised valuation. And as I said, impacting all 21-22 audits. It's not a unique Hammersmith and Fulham issue on the accounts. So that's probably the key issue. We're closing down other areas of the audit, which are on page 3 of our report, but generally they're fairly minor issues. And myself and Paul Dossett are carrying out our senior management review of the completed audit work, which is a fairly detailed process, always coming at the end of the audit. And once we do that, we anticipate that we'll be able to give an unmodified opinion on both the council statements and the pension fund statements. In our audit work, we've identified just a small number of adjustments and disclosure changes. Those are in Appendix C of the report. I don't propose to go through those page by page in a turning the pages exercise. But what I would say is, again, positively, the number of adjustments and disclosure issues compared to the 2021 audit is significantly reduced. So reflecting a higher quality set of statements and an audit which has progressed with fewer queries and less issues. We also note in Appendix B the positive progress towards addressing all the control recommendations that we made in our 2021 year audit. They've generally been addressed, or given they were finalised in May, there's significant progress since May to this current status in the year. We've made only 2 control recommendations for the 21-22 audit, and those are both fairly minor issues. I wouldn't sort of draw your attention strongly to those. We've discussed those with your finance team, and they're going to be looking at making those control adjustments to their control environment system. The only other thing I'd highlight for the current year audit is we have completed our field work on the value for money auditor's annual reports. We've done that across both years, 21-22 and 22-23, in an agreed piece of work to sort of catch up to the current year, given that we've reported the delay in the previous year's audits and discuss that with you. So again, really positive strides in progressing to get up to date with the work that we as auditors need to do, and your team need to get signed off in order to sort of get up to speed. And that's going to be reported to the November full council meeting. So the report is out in draft with your team, has been discussed, and we're going to finalise that and report that to full council. And I would pause at that point and not go into the audit plan 22-23. So I'd sort of stop on the 21-22 year, given that we've got different years being discussed, and just welcome any questions on the reports.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you to Sukhvinder. At this point, I would like to ask, is there any questions from members of the committee? Yeah, on this item? Yeah, Councillor Chivot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I had a question pretty much over to you. Is it on page 14, there's dispositions so that if between the time that now we have a sort of temporary opinion of the auditors and there is a final opinion of the auditors, and it is stated, I agree with it, that you should have the power to approve that. I was just wondering if perhaps at the next committee, in this committee, we get a sort of note circulated that tells us whether there were any changes, or you can orally update us.
Yes, say if there's any substantial changes beyond minor corrections, I'd be happy to report back to the committee on such changes before signing the accounts. Okay. Councillor Pascu Tilborough.
Thank you very much. A couple of quick ones, if I may. On page 359 in the public pack, there is, this is financial statements, other communication requirements. There's mention of significant difficulties in obtaining suitable analyses and populations of debtors and creditors, which has led to delays in work. I'd be interested in hearing a bit more about what caused those delays and how we can ensure that in the future they don't get in the way.
Yeah, that's fine. This is probably where the issues of referring to various different financial years becomes a bit sort of sticky for us, because this so this report is the 2021 audit findings report, so an audit that has been closed off, and we discussed these findings at a previous meeting. And I guess the follow on from that is we made control findings in that audit, in the 2021 audit findings report, your team have gone ahead and have been implementing those. So the control findings were broadly, you carried across older debtors and creditors from a previous general ledger system. There needed to be a tidy up, a rationalization of those older debtors and creditors, and that's what your team have been progressing since that audit findings report. I don't know, Chris, if you wanted to add anything more about that process, but there's the detail behind it. But
I think that,
yeah.
that covers it, Andy. I think
Yeah.
there's a legacy
legacy.
issue, which there has been a housekeeping exercise now. It never ends. It will be an ongoing housekeeping exercise, but that we feel that has largely now been addressed.
Yeah. And we didn't find significant issues with debtors and creditors testing in the 21-22 audit, which sort of reflects that some of those legacy issues with the older debtors and creditors were not being found in the current set of data.
Thank you.
Councillor Chivot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. There's mention in the report of a pension, in fact, in the pension fund report, of a fund, the Aviva fund. And I thought it might be interesting in the interest of the people listening at home or other members who are not on the pension fund to say that in the report it is identified as potential risk, but that on the advice of our advisors on the pension fund committee, we have pulled out of it and are moving away from it. So that's a risk that was not just listened to, but also acted on, which is proof of sort of very coherent advice that we get across committees. I had another observation, which was that, so for instance, on page 140, you don't need to go to it, but it's basically an overall point to say that at times in the report, it's a fantastic report. There's just a few things here and there where I think in terms of accessibility, we can improve ourselves. As you know, we've got a mayor whose agenda this year is accessibility and inclusivity. Red on white, white on red, purple on purple, that doesn't work out for many, many people. We're actually excluding residents from being able to access the information that's provided into them. So just an encouragement to continue to pioneer in this field. There's under the cabinet member for finance, a digital strategy that's going to come out, which emphasizes that we as a council are going to be the most accessible council in the country. I want us to continue on that. That's advice to every single one of you to please, when you want to make things pretty, and I think we all try to do that, there are websites that allow you to test online whether your colors are going to be failing WCAG criteria. Try that, see, and then usually just really go black on white. I don't know if anyone else has. No, go, just keep going.
Yes.
No, I wanted to draw people's attention to pages, and you can go to these ones if you want to. Pages 405 and 406, and I think there are observations in there that I think as we validate these accounts are really important to emphasize. I'll read some extracts. Local government funding continues to be stretched with increasing cost pressures due to the cost of living crisis, including higher energy costs. There's also something in there that actually we've managed to deliver an underspend against the budgeted general fund, despite external challenges, forces that include cost of living crisis, high inflation, interest rates, increasing demand for council services. So it pays tribute to the efforts that I think everyone across the board has done, and the hard work of everyone in the council, really. I think it's around this time of the year where we look at things and appreciate that we're in a good place where others aren't. So I just wanted to pay tribute to everyone who's been involved in this.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members? Councillor Ronery, Cabinet Member for Finance.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, I wanted to start actually by echoing the point that Councillor Chivot-Verdier has just made. Getting an annual statement of accounts out is a heck of a job. You know, it takes an awful lot of people, an awful lot of time, and I'm sure an awful lot of sleepless nights to get us to this position. So I wanted to thank everybody who's been involved in that, everyone in the finance team, in the pensions team, but then everybody across the whole of the council. You know, this is the whole of the council accounts, and so it's taken people, officers from all departments working on this to try and get us to this situation. So thank you very much, everybody, for all of your hard work. I wanted to thank Andy as well for coming this evening. It's really good to have you here. I guess my question to you, my first question to you would be, were you able to get everything you needed in terms of getting the report together? Were officers timely in sending you the information that you needed to make your decisions?
Yes, yeah, the officers were very timely in providing information, and we've worked very well together this year. And such areas such as the sample testing, I mean, particularly around debtors and creditors, which we discussed last year, took some time, has speeded up significantly this year. And we're looking forward to starting the 22-23 audit in October onwards, and we'll be meeting for, I mean, every audit has a debrief. There's always, it's a huge process. There's lots of areas of testing, lots of work that we do together. So there's always a debrief. There's always areas to look at for efficiencies in the audit so that it makes it quicker, and we'll be discussing those and taking those forward.
Thank you very much. I know that this is a very challenging sector to be working in. Firstly, because of the lack of firms providing audit services to local governments. There was a report recently saying there's under 100 qualified senior audit partners who are able to sign off local government accounts. So we know there's an issue with the market, but also because of the difficulties that local government is going through, whether it's Birmingham, whether it's Woking. We've got councils across the country really struggling, and residents, I suppose, really concerned that their council's accounts are accurate. There's no hidden risks there for them. So it was announced recently that the government is setting new requirements that all audits should be published for, what is it, 2021 and 21-22 accounts for dates at the start of next year. Mm. Do we think that obviously Grant Thornton is the auditor for an awful lot of local authorities? Is this work going to impact on H&F's 22-23 audit, which will be starting after this is signed off?
So looking forward into 22-23, 23-24, there's been a new contract negotiated and signed by public sector audit appointments, including yours in that sort of process, which is forward-looking, looking at investing in the markets. Fees are going up, which is, it's going to be an investment in audit teams, and there's also further investment in finance teams to strengthen that process. So we're already planning on starting a 22-23 audit promptly after this audit in October onwards, with a plan to progress that quickly and finish the field work by December in this year. So there's plans in place with a resourced audit team, a lot of consistency in that audit team with auditors who've already know your authority and have worked on previous audits. So confident that audit will progress quickly and be completed by the end of the year, essentially sort of demonstrating the catch-up process that Grant Thornton is going through on sort of lots of these audits where there's been delayed sign-offs previously. So
excellent. Thank you. You said the end of the year, that's the end of the financial year in April, or the end of the calendar year?
We're finishing field work by the end of December 22-23. We would be looking to sign the audit off in the beginning of 24 because of that sort of senior manager director review process that does then go beyond that, but signing the opinion before the end of the financial year. So that's our aim. I will caveat it as always with an auditor's point that subject to anything that might come up in the audits, a delay from either side, it can happen.
Do you think we could get a commitment that if there are no major issues, we could get 22-23 signed off before the end of the financial year?
Not knowing if there are going to be any issues, we have the barring major issues. I'll be the typical auditor and just caveat it that way. Paul would kill me if but as I said, we have a strong team in place, an appropriately sized team. Your finance team have been strengthened in the last couple of years, so we're in a good position, and the 21-22 year audit was much quicker than the previous year as well. So sort of reassuring noises.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Just on that question, actually, about the kind of, you note that the efficiencies that have been in the delivery of the reports to you, is there any particular changes that you've observed, or any particular reasons as to why this year seems to have worked better than previous years?
So, I mean, it's a good question. It's probably quite a big question, given the years that we're talking about where there were delays in audits were sector wide, really. It was across local government, and a lot of the impact was a combination of COVID, everyone working from home. So audits were disrupted because the classic way of delivering an audit would be for us, our auditors, to be on site in a room face to face with your finance team. So disruption there. The points we've mentioned around a sort of limitation of supply of trained auditors in the public sector, which has been going on for a number of years, and also impacts in local government finance teams where there was quite a lot of turnover and cuts to teams as well. So it's kind of a perfect storm of those kind of features, which meant when the 1920 and 2021 year audits in a lot of local government bodies were delayed and went on for a substantial period of time. And we're kind of in the period of recovery from that, where everyone has adapted to hybrid working. Everyone knows how to deliver an audit in that way. We're investing, your finance teams and other local government finance teams are sort of getting people in place as well. That sort of turnover is slowed. So it's a lot of different things, but we're in a much better position now. And there's that sort of will to
particularly
catch up.
the hybrid working. Obviously, traditionally you'd come in, you'd sit within the finance team or sit within the council and be able to interact more freely. With kind of remote working, hybrid working becoming more standardized now, as opposed to the kind of rude awakening that was COVID for that type of working arrangement. And do you feel that there is sufficient measures in place to ensure that there is a smooth transfer of information between the council and yourselves now?
Yep. So even in 1920, when we had the sort of sudden shift to online working, for a number of years, we had been to some extent working on all electronic documents. All the information was transferred across to us online. We have a system called Inflow where we upload all of our audit requests and say, can you provide this, 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 and this? And your team have access to that from their side and upload the documents. So the systems are in place. They've been strengthened since. We're ever more using digital tools to support the audits to increase the pace of audit. So all the infrastructure, the online infrastructure is there and has been there for a number of years to enable that. And we've delivered the 21-22 audit almost 100% remotely. Our team didn't come on site because it's possible to deliver audits that way. And that's becoming a fairly standard model as everyone's now sort of become sort of used to that, is able to do it. And there are efficiencies there, of course. Once you kind of get there and the infrastructure's there and everyone can work that way, we can do things more quickly. Your teams can do things more quickly and get the audit done quicker. Yeah.
Perfect. Are there questions from members? Okay. I did have one further question just on page 140, and this may be a question for Nicola, just regarding the KPIs for our contractors for repairs, and that the contractors haven't been able to quite meet those KPIs. Is there further conversations with those contractors at the moment about how they can get to that point of achieving those KPIs? Or can you talk a little bit on that matter, please?
Certainly. As I'm sure members of the committee are aware, there is a significant improvement process that we're going through with regard to housing repairs at the moment. And that involves working with our contractors on their delivery at the minute and in respect of their performance against those KPIs. So there are ongoing discussions, and the repairs service and housing service are in dialogue constantly in terms of improving performance against those KPIs.
Thank you. Are there any further questions from members of the committee? Okay. In that case, the recommendations are do members agree to approve the 21-22 annual governance statement, which included in the statement of accounts, that's Appendix 1. Recommendation 2, to approve the statement of accounts for 21-22, including the pension fund accounts, also included in Appendix 1. And recommendation 3, to note the content of the external auditor's findings report, ISA 260, including the auditor's finding recommendation and the council's response to the recommendations. That's included in Appendix 2. Recommendation 4, to approve the 21-22 management representation letters. That's Appendix 3 and 4. Recommendation 5, to approve the pension fund annual report 21-22. That's in Appendix 5. Recommendation 6, to note that the accounts remain unaudited until a final sign-off by the external auditor. Recommendation 7, to delegate authority to the chair of the audit committee in consultation with the director of finance to approve any further adjustments to appendices 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, which may be required as part of the completion of the audit work. And recommendation 8, to note the supplementary updates on the consultation of the audit to the 2020-21 accounts and publication of the draft 22-23 accounts and associated appendices. Is that agreed?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. And thank you to Andy and the team. Okay, moving along to item 5, the risk assessment and audit plan for the 22 and 23 year. Could I ask for Andy Conlon from Grant Thornton to introduce the report, please? And also attending on this item is Sukhvinder, James, and Chris.
Thank you, Chair. So as mentioned, this is the indicative external audit plan for the Council and Pension Fund financial statements audit 22-23. It's currently an indicative audit plan to enable us to start the audit in October. We do still have some planning work to complete in October. So if anything was to arise during that work, we would report back to you. But what I would say is that this is a very likely accurate indicative audit plan of the areas of risk for the audit. It should be relatively familiar to you. The risks in the audit are the same risks that we reported for the 21-22 audits. There aren't sort of new risks in there that I would highlight. I'd just say, so the significant risks for the audit are, what we're saying are the main areas of focus and special attention for auditors in addressing during the audit. So we're not highlighting those as unique issues for Hammersmith and Fulham as an entity. They would be relatively common to other local government councils. The other things I'd just highlight to you on page 405 of your pack, we have given some more context on audit reporting delays. We've discussed it quite a bit during this meeting already, but I'd just highlight Grant Thornton have issued a report, which is quite an interesting one called About Time, which is about the reasons there have been reporting delays in local government audits. I recommend it. It's a good read. So it's got some good points in there, and it's forward looking as well. It's sort of optimistic and forward looking as to changes in the market and how that's going to positively impact our work going forward. As we do every year, we highlight any updates that have been to the ISAs, the International Standards on Auditing, because they do get updated regularly. And the two updates impacting on the 22-23 financial year are ISA 240, which is around the fraud risk, which is present in all audits. It's an assumed risk, a presumed significant risk rather. And then ISA 315, which is around the IT general controls. And really at the high level, this requires auditors to do increased planning work to understand your systems, your IT general control systems, and also to understand the control environment the council has in place to prevent fraud. So it does expand the remit of the auditor and the work that we do on the audits. There is an impact on the fee, as you will have seen on the fees page, and that would be common across all local government audits. We have to do that work. We're required to under the ISAs. I think otherwise, I'd take the report as read and just welcome any questions on that.
Thank you, Andy. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Councillor Shivop-Verdio.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a question to you about the way that the approved limits are calculated. So you tell us this is limits set up by the Treasury, I suppose. How these Treasury limits and prudential indicators set up? Or am I wrong to say it's
What page are you referring to?
This is page 435 of the report. So in there, you tell us about prudential indicators.
Yes. So yes.
Am I in the wrong document? Fantastic. Oh, sorry.
You did somewhat alarm me then, because I can remember having mentioned those in my report.
Sorry about that.
Are there any other questions from members of the committee? Just in terms of, and this is maybe a question to David, just in terms of the fees associated with audit committee, could you speak a little bit on obviously the increases that we've seen in the fees and the value for money assurances that would be expected from such fees being paid?
Thank you, Chair. Happy to pick that up, and I'm sure colleagues will assist as well. So as Andy said earlier, the Public Sector Audit Appointments Body actually appoint the external auditors. They set the fee scales for the audit work to be carried out, and the authority then is given the opportunity to sort of consider that and then to accept that. There's been a move, the Redmond review, which we talked about earlier in the presentation, in the pre-meeting, very much highlighted the fact that actually the competitive process had driven fees down, but actually that impact on the quality and the timeliness of work. So there's a lot of work being done now through the new contracts that Andy mentioned to get fees to an appropriate level for the work that needs to be done, the quality of staff that the external auditor needs to appoint. And I think for me, when you compare the cost of the fee for the audit for the local authority, given its turnover of circa 600 million, compared to what a private sector firm we were paying for its audit fee, would be millions. I think we do get good value for money from our externals, and they are required by the FRC and others to carry out substantial amounts of work, and they themselves are subject to quality assurance reviews externally as well to ensure the quality and the depth of work that's being carried out is appropriate.
I wouldn't add anything to that. That's very succinct summary of the.
Councillor Patel.
Chair, I remember last year there was a lot of hoo-ha about the scale of fees of the auditors, and I think we received reassurance that we were going to see a comparison of other fees which may have been tendered at the time. I don't think I've seen anything since then. Can we have some comment on that?
Chair, we can certainly check with PSAA. I'm not sure if they publish the fees for every authority, but that each authority would have the same report that Andy's brought here to you. So we can do some benchmarking to be able to provide. Andy may have some further information on that.
Well, so the scale fees set by PSAA do have, each body is different and they have a historic basis as well. So I would say they're not necessarily always directly comparable because different bodies have their own challenges, their own risks, but all fees are published, so they're publicly available and that information is available.
Certainly, so if we could just ensure that if that information hasn't already been made available to members of the committee, that it be made available. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Pascoe-Tilborough?
Thank you very much. Just a very quick one from me. To what extent do you consider reputational issues in materiality?
So, I mean, the concept of materiality, it is broad. It's what users of the financial statements would consider was significant in decision making. So, reputational risk, I'd say it has less of an impact on materiality, but it's something that probably comes through more in the value for money work. So we consider, as you will see in last year's reports, the freeze, economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. governance and financial sustainability, and we give a detailed commentary on those areas. In terms of the financial statements audit, I'd say that it's in amongst the mix of all the factors that we consider, but I mean, sort of difficult to sort of quantify to a certain extent. Yeah.
Are there any further questions? Okay. In that case, the recommendations are, do members agree to note the risk and audit plan for 22 and 23?
Noted or agreed.
Okay, thank you. Moving along to item 6, the Treasury Management Outrun Report for 22 and 23. Can I ask Patrick Rowe to introduce the item, and also attending on this item is Sophie Green.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. So this is the outturn report. It's a report that you may be familiar with. It's one of 2 reports that we bring each year. Normally it's the outturn, that's the full year results of the Treasury function, and then the mid-year results. I'm going to take this as largely read, but there's a couple of things that I'll just highlight. So first of all, there was no new borrowing in the year. This is to the end of March 23. So no new borrowing, but the reserve balances declined a little bit. That's due to spend in the capital program largely, and it's a completely reasonable position to be in. And what you did see is really positive interest receivables on the cash balances in the general fund and the HRA as well. And that's down to the interest rate environment that we're operating within. Throughout the previous financial year, we really saw some significant changes in the financial market. Inflation was on the way up and indeed peaked in that time. And as a result, the Bank of England was constantly raising rates. So what that meant for us was to think carefully about our borrowing strategy and utilize council reserves as far as possible, so as to not have to lock into long-term borrowing at interest rates that are relatively high, looking at the past decade. And it also meant that against the reserves that we did hold throughout the year, we generated higher than expected interest receivable. So borrowing ended at the year 271.7 million in the overall picture. So otherwise, prudential indicators, Councillor Chabot, but yeah, you asked the question, I'll preempt it, I'll give you the answer. That comes from SIP for guidance. These are standardized indicators. They're useful tools to report on, to measure and report on a quarterly basis to ensure that the Treasury function is operating within the limits that it's predefined by. And those limits are set in the Treasury management strategy, and they're set in reference to the capital strategy. So they are ultimately approved by members. And we have reference to those, and what those indicators are is set out by SIPFA in its guidance notes. And throughout the year, all of the indicators were met, and so there were no issues there. I think that's all that I really wanted to touch on or highlight. So I'm happy to, at that point, open up to questions.
Thank you. On this point, I'd like to bring in Councillor Rowan Ree, Cabinet Member for Finance.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to say a few words just because yeah, there's a temptation, I think, sometimes to skip over the Treasury Management Outturn reports. They're quite complicated bits of literature, and not many people watching will understand necessarily the minutiae of what it is we're discussing. But I did want to take a minute just to pay tribute to Sophie, to Patrick, to the Treasury management team, to have managed to, I think we had, was it 14 consecutive interest rate increases from the Bank of England, to be able to steer such a calm course in such volatile conditions, I think is an absolutely remarkable job. So I think we owe a huge debt of gratitude. Perhaps debt is the wrong word, considering the fact we haven't taken on any new prudential borrowing over the year, and we've operated within all of our Treasury limits and prudential indicators. We're, I think, in a very sound position as a council because of this work and because of the prudent decisions that we've taken as a council in terms of not borrowing. You never know what's around the corner. You know, a couple of years ago, who would have thought we'd be in a situation where interest rates are where they are? Who would have guessed that we'd have gone through what we went through in the last financial year? I'd just like to pay tribute to the foresight and the skill of the Treasury management team who've managed to guide us through this.
Thank you, Councillor Ree. I'd like to echo those remarks as well. Are there any further questions? Councillor Shivot-Verdier.
Just a remark, if this isn't a session to congratulate each other and pat each other on the back, there are significant challenges ahead of us, but the cabinet member will be too humble to admit it also that their gratitude, we owe a bit to him as well. Your hard work too.
Perfect. I did have a question regarding the maturity of the loans. So obviously looking towards the future, there is obviously going to be a uptick in when the loans mature. Do you foresee any opportunity to perhaps, assuming when interest rates we hope do improve, to renegotiate obviously the interest rates attached to it and perhaps reduce the I'd say the uptick of when the money would become due?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So absolutely, we will look to get the best optimal borrowing rates that we possibly can at that time when we do look to refinance, and refinance is what we may do. I sort of touched on our ability to utilize reserves to sort of fund the capital program spend, and if it's appropriate at that time, that's a strategy we'll continue to look at doing if it's appropriate. If we do indeed need to take out some borrowing, or if it's strategically optimal to do that, we have a fairly broad range of borrowing options available to us. Typically, what we would do is look to the Public Works Loans Board, where we can get fairly favourable rates, actually, relative to the rest of the market generally, and that's generally gilts plus a certain percentage basis points. So, for example, with the general fund, it's the gilt rate plus 80 basis points. So it's very competitive, and we can utilise that at the time that we would look to do that. Where we would perhaps utilise some nuance is looking at the duration and looking at the size of the tranche that we might take out. And certainly right now, if we were needing to borrow, what we would do is probably take lots of smaller tranches over a period of 6 months of different duration to reduce the maturity risk and the interest rate risk by effectively, spreading the eggs, not having them in one basket. So we certainly look at all of those strategic options at the point that we need to borrow, and certainly the point that we might need to refinance as a result of loans maturing. We would consider all of those things.
Councillor Patel.
Just to echo back the sentiments expressed by Councillor Rowe and the previous councillor, many congratulations in not borrowing since March 23. The only point of worry is to what degree has the reserves been depleted? As we found out with Birmingham Council and before that Croydon, it's always dangerous not to have reserves on a rainy day, for instance. So can you please give us some more information on that?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Patel. It's a good question. given we're in September and this is a snapshot at the end of March. There's obviously been a period of time there. I do have our treasury book as of today, and actually our reserves as of today are 246 million. So actually there have been minor fluctuations, but we're largely still in line with where we closed out the year. And certainly our cash flow projections, which we are looking at very carefully at the moment, because there is a significant opportunity here to reduce the need to borrow and maximize the revenue potential from our reserves. And our cash flow projections suggest very healthy reserves for the medium term. So yes, it's a very good point. We are monitoring that very closely, myself and Sophie, constantly in conversation with Sukhvinder and James and Andre as well, and we're modeling this out to try and optimize that.
Councillor Pascu-Tilbury.
Thank you very much. On a similar vein, it's one of the perversities of times like this that cash tends to do rather well. What would you see as a optimal level of cash reserves to be aiming for, all other things being equal?
Optimum level of reserves, did you say? Sorry, yeah. I mean, I think as high a level as possible is great. To find an optimal level is tricky. I think what we would look at instead is what's the opportunity cost of utilizing funds at the moment to continue funding spend in the capital program predominantly, as opposed to borrowing. Where do we think interest rates are likely to go over the next couple of years relative to what we might have to lock in at if we do borrow? And what might the cost of carry be if we did borrow that and then didn't have to spend it immediately? So it's a fine balance. We typically have a threshold system that if balances dropped below, I think is it 50 million, that would be the sort of trigger that we would really look closely at that. But that threshold's not a set in stone threshold. It's an indicator for us. And it would be utilized not just within what the cash balances are today, but also within our sort of projection over the 6-month, 12-month period, so that if we do think there's a sufficient drop in interest rates and that's an optimal time to borrow, we might perhaps do that as well, borrowing before the threshold, but recognizing that the threshold might be hit in another 4 or 5 months. So I can't give you an optimum level, but that's hopefully an explanation of the nuance behind it that we would consider.
Very helpful. Thank you very much.
Could I invite Councillor Ree on this?
Thank you very much. I think just on that point, it's important to remember the purpose of the Treasury management function, right? We're not a hedge fund. It's very tempting to look at, returns and all sorts of various things that we could be putting money into. But the purpose of the Treasury management strategy is to have money available for when we need it, and where we do have reserves, to make sure that they're getting appropriate returns, but also that they're available when and if we need them. We're as innovative as we are, and we're always looking at the cheapest ways to get money and the best places to store money to meet those purposes. It's important also to be prudent in terms of thinking about where we are putting it.
Are there any further questions from members of the committee? Okay. In that case, the recommendation is, do members agree to note the annual Treasury Management Overturn Report for 22 and 23?
Agreed. Agreed.
Okay, perfect. Thank you to Patrick and Sophie. Moving along to item 7, the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman Annual Review letter for 22 and 23. And could I ask Nicola Ellis to introduce the item?
Thank you, Chair. The report details the most recent annual review letter, which is received in July and relates to the period from April 22 to March 23. The Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman covers all, with a vast majority of council services. Some housing services are covered by the Housing Ombudsman and they report performance differently, and that will be reported separately. But the vast majority of all other services are covered by the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman. So in terms of our performance for the year 22-23, we saw a increase and improvement in our performance overall, and also that our performance is better than average and in the top 4 when compared to other London boroughs. In that year, the key figures really are that the Ombudsman investigated 28 cases across a number of different services and upheld 18 of those cases. So that equates to a rate of 64% decisions being upheld. That's lower than 76% in 21-22 for us, and also quite significantly really lower for similar authorities where the average is 77%. We also had 100% compliance with the recommendation and orders in that period. The average when compared to similar authorities is 99%, and we've maintained our 100% performance from last year. Also, a significant improvement in those cases where we had satisfactorily resolved the issue prior to the Ombudsman issuing the decision. We had 28% of those resolved during that period. It was 8% in 21-22, and the average is 15% for similar authorities. So I mentioned our comparison to other London boroughs, and the figures are included in Appendix B. We have the 4th lowest percentage of decisions upheld of all London boroughs. And it's also really positive to see that the 4th highest percentage of cases where the issue has been resolved prior to the decision for all London boroughs. So, I mean, to put it all into context, those 28 cases that went to the Ombudsman and were investigated, as I mentioned, they're across the vast majority of services which serve our whole population of 189,000. There were some comments made in the annual letter with regard to some responses on housing cases. We did have that comment, similar comment in previous year. We have addressed those and looked into it in a lot more detail. We do have some that we will discuss with the Ombudsman in terms of the detail that they're reporting. But overall, as part of the improvement plan on the housing service, we are now seeing improved responses because everything is going through a single point of contact for housing responses through the dispute resolution team. And so overall, I think it's a very positive report for the council this year.
Thank you, Nicola. Just my first question I'd like to ask is regarding, obviously, you say there's been 18 complaints that were upheld. Could you tell me about perhaps the learning opportunities from that? You've had 18 instances where they've come back and said, essentially, the council was at fault here. What is the process that follows? Is it after each case, or is it at the end of the year that you review? Could you comment on that, please?
Yeah, so after each case, we receive a detailed decision, and that detailed decision is discussed with the complaint handlers, the resident experience team, and also the service areas. So we look at those individually in terms of what learning we can take from individual decisions. We're also, and this is a work in progress and developing, looking more at the themes across Ombudsman findings and decisions. A lot of focus has been obviously on the Housing Ombudsman side because we have more findings in that area. And so we're looking more generally at themes and findings across decisions so that we can look at whole scale changes across the council.
Thank you. Councillor Patel.
I'm surprised that the view taken is that this is a positive response to the letter. I think 64% of complaints being upheld, in my humble view, is very poor. I think it's you can't justify it on the basis that we're in the top 4 of London boroughs. It's very bad. In most commercial organizations, I think that would be regarded as being unacceptable. Can you tell us the level of compensation which was paid out pursuant to these 18 complaints if you're upheld?
I don't have those figures. I can provide them to you. But just to put that in context, it's not 64% of all complaints that are upheld. It's 64% of the 28 cases that were investigated by the Ombudsman. 80 cases actually, well, I think it's 88, actually went to the Ombudsman, and they only looked into 28 of those cases. In terms of the scale of the number of complaints across the council, across all of our services, it's a very small number that actually goes through to the local government and social care Ombudsman. And in comparison, when compared and benchmarked against other authorities, I think it's in line really with what we would expect.
Sorry, just a follow-on question. I have raised this previously. Does the council have any procedure to refer these complaints to an external organization before it actually hits the Ombudsman? Most commercial organizations use that. They use an external body which will independently review the matter and try to kill the complaint before it gets to the Ombudsman stage. Is that being adopted here?
No, that's not. We have a 2-stage complaint process, and we follow the local government Ombudsman recommendations on the process that we need to follow.
Councillor Short-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. I actually wanted to take the polar opposite view, which was to actually reread the sentence at the beginning of the report that this demonstrates our performance increasing when compared to 21-22, which are years, let's not forget, we were coming out of COVID. So we're not improving at a time where everything's fine. We're improving at a time where health, every service is needed more and more, and people working from home, we've heard previously the impact of that. So I think for me, that mandates a triple well done also to, cabinet member for health and so and adult care, cabinet member for education, all these people working hard, and yourself, Nicola, you have a title like the Emperor of Austria. So I won't read it in full, but we're all very impressed with your work. We're 20% below our neighbour RBKC in terms of complaints upheld. We're just separated by a railway line. Somehow we seem to be doing a much better work. So I actually, not a question really, just a comment to say, again, well done, I think, on this report.
Councillor Pascoe-Tilborough.
Thank you very much. I agree entirely with Councillor Patel on this. Looking at the numbers, 2021, we had 10 full decisions, 7 of which were upheld. 21-22, we had 17, 13 of which were upheld. This year, 22-23, we had 28, 18 of which were upheld. These are numbers unfortunately going in one direction, and it would be good to have your comments on that. The sort of point I was very keen to make is the language used in the Ombudsman's letter. And I was a civil servant myself for 10 years, and I would have hesitated many times before in the same paragraph using poor, disappointing, and concerning. Is this usual language?
So with regard to the trend for previous years, you mentioned the figures that you mentioned. You can see in the table that the numbers being upheld has reduced when compared to last year. In 2021, it was 70% upheld.
The raw numbers are increased.
In terms of the numbers being referred to the Ombudsman, in terms of the decisions made by the Ombudsman. In 2021, there were 10 decisions. In 2021-22, there were 17 decisions. During that period, the Ombudsman did stop accepting complaints. So there is a period of catch up happening with the Ombudsman at the moment. They do have quite a significant time delay in publishing the decision. So as I mentioned, during the pandemic period, they stopped accepting complaints. And so we are seeing increased numbers of determinations coming back, basically. Sorry, what was your second question? In which paragraph in particular? In the one?
Microphone, please.
In the non-glowing one, let me just find it.
So it's under your organisation.
Your organisation's
Yeah.
performance. Yes. I think always the Ombudsman will put something in there specifically with regard to the council's performance. I think, yes, it's disappointing, and disappointing is one of the words that's used. It's disappointing that they did find some delays with 5 of the responses. I think it's the only consolation is in respect of one service area across the whole council, and a service area where there's significant work on improvement that's happening at the moment. So I'm confident that that won't be experienced in the future. Fingers
Thank you very
crossed.
much.
Are there further questions to members of the committee? Councillor Chavot, I'll go to you, Councillor Alexander.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Nicola. I'll just scribble down 4 questions, if I could. Firstly, if we're the 4th lowest in out of the London boroughs, what are the other 3 and who's number 5?
Those figures are included in the appendix. So if we have a look, it would help if they were in some sort of order, wouldn't it? So so in terms of decisions upheld, we're on 64%. Ealing have 61%, so a lower number. I'm scrolling through. Thank you. And number 5, I guess, might well be Hounslow if they're on 65%.
Thanks. And in terms of the number that we've had this year and previous years, what's our prediction for the number that we're going to have next year?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but I can give you come back to you with some figures on how many determinations we've had so far.
Would it be possible to make a prediction?
It would be in terms of, well, I can in fact look up my last quarterly report. I just put my finger in the air. I would say we're around the same level as in this year.
Okay, so I should have asked my 3rd question to make my 2nd question easier. How are we going to, I don't like to use the word target, but how are we going to make sure that we don't creep up on this, and that we meet, if our expectation is that we're going to have the same number next year, then I'm sure we are doing stuff, but for some reason it's not making a difference, or we don't predict it's going to make a difference.
I think that's around the delays that I mentioned, but there is a huge amount of improvement work happening in complaint handling, focused primarily on the housing service. As you know, we've been working very closely with them, but it's also had a knock-on effect across the whole of the council. So I am very confident that there is much more focus within all of the service areas on the resolution of complaints at the earliest stage. So obviously our ideal is not to have the complaints, but where we do, to resolve them fully at stage 1 so that we don't go to stage 2 and then further on to the Ombudsman. and also a huge focus on making sure that complaints are responded to on time, with very, very clear ownership with the strategic directors across their departments. So I believe we're definitely going across the board in a trajectory of improvement at the moment.
Just to add, Chair, there's regular scrutiny at SLT, strategic leadership teams,
Absolutely.
around complaints performance as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just have one last, which is, I'll explain it a little bit because otherwise people might get lost with this. On environment and public, we've got 7 received. Would that incorporate noise complaints? And the reason I say noise complaints are we've had different policies over the years for noise related and environmental pollution problems relating to council housing, where the council housing department have been investigating those complaints rather than the environment department with their experts. And I keep seeing in my casework so many complaint issues where there are elements of noise in there, and it's not so much the arguments, these are the ones that I'm seeing CC'd to the Ombudsman. I'm seeing them CC'd to one of our 2 MPs, and there's obviously people are not satisfied. I take that as a level of that they've lost confidence in what we're doing locally, and that they're copying in the MPs or the Ombudsman at an early stage, irrespective of whether their complaint's going to run. They don't have there's a lack of confidence.
Yes, noise complaints would be included in environment and public. There could be some noise complaints that are considered by the housing ombudsman as well, if it's part of the landlord function, so that they wouldn't feature in these. In terms of noise complaints, that's been an area of focus for the ombudsman fairly recently. It's very common that there are a lot of complaints across the whole of the country in respect of noise, and there were some investigations and some spotlight reports on noise, I believe, but we didn't feature as having a particularly high number in those. In terms of the policies that we're following at any one time, the ombudsman, when they investigate the complaint, will ask for the relevant policy at that time and will judge us against that policy at that time. So that becomes part of their determination as well.
Thank you very much. And if I can just, again, that was going to be my last, just one, slip one. Could we have noise delineated slightly from in the services because of the way it overlaps into environment and housing? Because it seems that that housing may well be getting more noise because it'll be connected with a repair and something else, but the noise function is a statutory function of the council, so it may well be getting lost in that because of departments not being able to. The housing department can't deal with a statutory noise complaint. And if the environment department are not following through because they're saying, well, the council need to fix the hole in the roof, which is why the rain's coming in, there's so much noise, it gets lost there. And I could actually refer those to real case, to real cases.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the services do work closely together, but I can feed that back to the service area.
So we could get some reporting to look at where the noise is relating into a housing issue. Yep,
I will. I'll go back to the service area and come
Nicola,
back.
thank you very much. I'm sorry for so many questions.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Councillor Chivot-Verdier.
Thank you, Chair. In the letter from the Ombudsman, there's a mention with a view of improving processes and making it easier for local authorities to navigate them, which I appreciate is tough. They're talking about developing a joint complaint handling code and consulting on it. I was wondering if you knew more about this, what the timeline of this is.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the timeline is at the moment. So the Housing Ombudsman has a complaint handling code, And we have a duty to self-assess against that code. And we have used that really as the basis for our improvement. So we've recently carried out a further self-assessment. We have to do it annually, so that we will be reporting that to members at some point in the near future. And we've used that code as our basis for our improvement plan. And we feel that we are compliant in most areas now. So that is the code that the local government ombudsman is going to adopt as well. So we think we're in a really good place when that comes in, whenever that may be. I'm not entirely sure when the dates are that's going to come in as being a joint code, but I think it will be fairly soon, and we will be in a good place in terms of our compliance with that code.
Thank you for that. That's great. So it's not a code that relates particularly to the topic or area that the ombudsman looks after. It's really a methodology. And what we're thinking, what you're saying is that the two will end up having the same sort of approach method. That's great. Okay.
That's my impression of that's the way it's going to happen. Yeah, and it's a code that looks at what best practice is around complaint handling.
Councillor Ree.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Nicola. I think this is actually a really good report, not because the numbers are high or the numbers are low, but because of the focus that it gives to the individual complaints, the individual complainants. It would be very easy for a council, I think, writing a report like this to try and pretend that there aren't, everyone's happy to, as it says, we're the fourth lowest in London. You could have splashed that all over the top of the report and ignored the details of the complaints. But the report doesn't do that. It does provide details of where these complaints are. And that's because this is something that the council is intent on getting to the bottom to. I'm sure everybody working for the council thinks that one complaint is one complaint too many that's upheld. I'm sure that everybody wants to make sure that we get into a situation where not only is nobody complaining to the ombudsman, but everyone is happy with everything that's going on in the borough and feels no need to raise objections to councillors, to MPs, to the ombudsman, to anybody. Nicola's absolutely right to talk about the mitigations and the improvements that we've made since then. And I think it's important to highlight that actually when we're looking at a report like this that looks at ombudsman findings, it is looking at things that have happened in the past. It's very much like trying to drive a car only by looking at the rear view mirror. You're seeing what's happened behind you, and it doesn't necessarily reflect what's happening. But as I've said, we're looking at every single individual complaint, as you raised, Chair. We're trying to make sure that in all of these areas, we can learn all the lessons that we can to make sure that the service works as well as it can for everybody. And so, hopefully that means that in the future, we won't be getting as many or any complaints. It'd be great if we could get to a stage where these are falling and everybody's happy with the service that they're receiving across the whole council.
Thank you. I think that's a very important point to be made and to be noted. Are there any final remarks? Okay, in that case, do members agree to note the content of the LGSCO annual letter for the 22-23 period?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, in that case, item 8, dates for the future meetings. Do members agree to note the following dates of future meetings? That is the 27th of November 23 and the 11th of March 24.
Agreed.
Fabulous. Okay, in that case, I will draw this meeting to a close and say thank you to everybody who has joined and contributed this evening and those who are watching as well. Good night.